This is the Construction Insiders Podcast. I'm Jessica Busch, bringing you the newest trends and strategies in construction, essential to anyone in the industry. On today's episode of the Construction Insiders Podcast, we are joined by Jason Zubatkin, the practice leader of cultural institutions at Cumming Group. We're here to discuss the intricate world of large-scale historic restorations. Thank you for taking the time, Jason, to sit down. I know it's a busy day, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to an engaging dialogue.
So talking about this topic of historic preservation, we haven't touched on it yet in this podcast. So we wanted to dive in today, talk about, aging buildings, the demands for modernization, how we balance that, the expertise needed to preserve the architectural well-being while still progressing. That challenge seems to be increasingly vital. So hoping you're the guy to walk us through it.
I hope so too.
As getting to know you, I think you are. So, Jason, let's jump in. Knowing you've been involved in some of the most high-profile restoration projects over the years around the world, I know you're going to have a lot to talk about. Just getting to know you over the last couple of months since Zubatkin joined Cumming Group, I think you have a lot of information to give us on this topic. And where do we start? Where do we start for maybe a listener that isn't as familiar with this kind of niche topic? Where should we kick this off?
So, great question. The first thing I'll say is that every project in terms of a historical restoration is unique.
Okay.
But at the same point in time, they are all incredibly exciting and give clients oftentimes great opportunity to, as you said, preserve architectural integrity and things that are so important to us as a society and our history, while modernizing the real estate to be able to use for future programs and activities and really be able to grow and develop programs that are being used. There's so much to get into here, and we could probably spend the next 5 or 6 hours talking about it, but I think we'll focus on a few of the fundamentals.
Okay.
And one of the things to start with is understanding what you have. Buildings today are not built the same the way that they were built 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago.
Okay.
And that relates not just to the architectural finishes and everything that you see on the walls or in front of you, but everything behind the walls as well.
The secrets.
Exactly. The secrets, the undiscovered secrets. Sometimes they're good undiscovered secrets, like there was additional structural support that can actually support larger programs or larger real estate than what was needed. Sometimes they're not so good, like the plumbing never ended up being completed in the right way, and we have some illegal issues that we need to deal with. So when you're really starting a historic restoration project, you need to start with the facts. And that relates to making sure you get a good level of due diligence done, which is not as simple as just hiring someone to go take some pictures and doing some little demo. It's really trying to understand the systems, how the systems work, and how the systems could work in the future. And when I'm talking about systems, specifically mechanical, your air conditioning, your heating, your electrical distribution, your plumbing distribution, and probably most importantly, life safety, sprinklers, fire alarm. We need to be safe in these buildings that we're repairing and we're reinventing.
So what are, and I think you were almost going to get there, what are some of these challenges, or have you experienced a particularly challenging restoration project that really opened your eyes to the complexities that can be hidden in an undertaking like this?
There's a lot to talk about here, and there's a lot of great projects. There's a project specifically that I think we'll talk about, which is St. Pat's Cathedral right here in New York. Incredible project, incredible landmark, not just known locally, but known all
worldwide.
Over the world.
Yeah.
Where we had 3 major components that we needed to deal with on this project. There was a residence for the priest specifically, a residence for the cardinal, as well as the cathedral itself. Going through that project had so many unique surprises. Everything from, frankly, plumbing actually not being installed and just being let out of the building rather than any kind of code compliance, which, yes.
Even in today's world, that's
even in today's world, and we laugh about it now, I'll tell you there was a moment on the project, it was like, "Wow, what are we gonna do here?" But everything from surprises like that to surprises that were actually great surprises, like seeing some architectural history that actually we didn't even know existed and none of the records had. So I think going back to my earlier point when we were talking initially, each one of these projects is very unique. And whether you're talking about St. Pat's Cathedral, a project like that, whether you're talking about the Museum of Natural History again in New York,
Mhm.
Planet Word Museum in Washington, D.C., all of these projects have it's almost like a puzzle,
Yeah.
and construction is a puzzle itself,
Mhm.
but a puzzle where you only have half the puzzle pieces and you kind of have to recreate some of the other ones is, well, an
So,
interesting game to play.
okay, so speaking of interesting games and puzzle pieces, on these projects, you mentioned a couple surprising discoveries, but when I'm assuming these are more the norm than the rarity. When you do find these interesting discoveries, how does that reshape your project approach?
So I think for starters, when you're thinking about a historic restoration and a project approach, you need to build in some flexibility. There's some flexibility on the budgeting side and having appropriate contingencies
Mhm.
to be able to deal with some of these surprises that you would never be able to understand. But you also need to have some flexibility in terms of just the fact finding mission.
Mm,
This is not where it's an exam and you take the exam and then you have all the answers.
right.
The answers happen over time.
Okay.
And what you need to be doing when you're thinking about the design, when you're thinking about the logistics, when you're thinking about the construction, of making sure you have the right balance of solid facts to be able to build a plan upon,
Mhm.
but a level of flexibility within that plan to be able to deal with those um, undiscovered issues that get discovered as part of the project.
And maybe in this sector, more flexibility than others.
It absolutely needs to be. I mean, you even think about the difference between a ground up construction versus a historic restoration. Ground up construction has its own set of complexities,
Mhm.
as we all know, but you're also starting with usually very little, if anything at all.
Right.
And you're able to build that puzzle yourself
The way you want.
the way that you want. Well, hopefully, ideally the way
Hopefully,
that you want.
depending on the client.
In the historic restorations, you have a whole bunch of different things that you need to be thinking about. Plus, the idea with the historic restoration is preserving those important architectural pieces
Right.
while being able to develop a building for future use and for successful future use without having limitations necessarily on how the organization or institution is going to be using the building.
So, when we're going into this process, then what does the team look like? What do you to really get a project on a successful kind of first step? What it from design, construction, what do you like those teams to look like?
So let's go through the whole process
Okay.
here because I think that there's a process in terms of how a team would get developed.
Okay.
First things first, you need to have your head coach. You need to, and this is a little bit self-serving, but in all honesty,
Mhm.
and the advice I give to everyone, whether they're talking to us or not, is you need to have that owner's rep who's able to have the experience, who's gone through these projects
Mhm.
before, and can determine when we have those challenges, when we have those surprises, how to navigate the team in terms of a course of
A
action.
veteran quarterback.
A veteran
I like
quarterback.
it. Okay.
Um, from there, there's always a architect involved from obviously a licensing and legal perspective to be able to develop those design documents all the way through construction documents. That design team will also include the appropriate engineers. There would potentially be a historic restoration consultant who would be involved.
Okay.
But also as important, especially when we're getting into some of the later design work, bringing on the construction manager or general contractor who's going to be involved in this project. Again, thinking about logistics, thinking about how all of these puzzle pieces, half of which we know, half of which we don't, are going to come together, are really important. Oftentimes, we use and leverage our construction partners for probe exercises,
Mm,
for going in and doing some initial projects to be able to see, well, what's behind some of these walls?
right.
Where can we hopefully mitigate some of our surprises further on? And how do we ultimately set up this project for success now during construction, and most importantly once construction's over and the owner occupier is actually using the space?
So this historic preservation, it's kind of feeling like in this discussion so far, it's really a balancing act between multiple stakeholders and time and what it needs to be used for now and in the future. So, what approach do you use to really balance between preserving history and that authenticity and accommodating for the modern needs of this building and what the future might hold?
That balance is the perfect word to describe it.
Okay.
It's not just about the project, right? There's oftentimes in these projects, they're either local or even national entities
Mm,
that have a role in making sure we have the right preservation plan to be able to respect the architecture of old, to respect the building of old, but bring it up to modern day use. So there's a big conversation and dialogue there that needs to happen to make sure that those entities are involved early and often to make sure that we have alignment on a plan. That's one thing. The other thing is that when we're really thinking about these renovations, yeah, we're looking in the past, right? What
mhm.
exists, what's there, but we're also looking towards the future.
Right.
What is this space going to be used as? Is it the same use? Is it a different use? Are there different amount of people coming in? I talked about the most important thing, making sure we have safety in terms
Right.
of these buildings. How do we get people safely in and out of these buildings?
In older buildings, that probably was not the first thought when they were built.
It wasn't, and the rules and regulations of how what safety is have
Right.
changed significantly.
Right.
Fire sprinklers, all of these type of things that need to come into balance together. No one wants to see sprinklers just on top of a beautiful, ceiling that was architecturally
Mosaic,
important.
beautiful stained glass. We gotta figure out how to get around that stuff.
We have to figure out how to get around it and make sure we have the balances of the use today, the safety of today, with the beauty and the respect for yesterday.
Yeah. And so, with technology and moving forward, tools like, we've heard about 3D scanning and drone
Yeah.
surveys, all kind of what's the norm right now. Um, it's really, I would assume, revolutionizing how we approach a building like this. What other new methodologies, technologies are you seeing in this space to really help do the balance and make sure the balance happens?
There are definitely more tools in the toolbox than there ever have been. The 3D scanning has been a really, really positive impact on understanding some of those surprises early on, which help us plan for a more successful
Right.
project. And not only just the 3D scanning itself, but the level of 3D scanning now, what things they can actually see behind the walls. There used to be limits on them. Now you almost get a pretty good picture of exactly
Wow.
what you have. So that's definitely one thing. The drones you mentioned as well
Mhm.
are another that can almost scan an entire building from the exterior. Really cool technology to use. No one's going to want me to pilot one of those drones, but really cool tech,
Especially here in New York.
especially here in New
There's
York.
too many
Um,
objects.
but really cool technologies that are able to be leveraged. I think the best plan of attack though is you can't use these as a one-off.
Mm,
I mean, again, going back to the veteran quarterback, the head coach, however, whatever analogy we want to use,
right.
we need to make sure we have a plan in place because all these things are cool. They all have their pitch line
Shiny
of
and yeah.
yes, we use us, we're going to be great. But you need to make sure you have the right plan because it's not just about spending money on cool toys. This is about having the right approach to be able to get value for every dollar that is spent, whether it's on the due diligence side of it, on the design side of it, or on the construction side of it.
So, how do you help a client make that balance between, spending money, that initial investment, right? Versus kind of what these long-term operational costs are going to be. What does that initial interaction look like?
One of the things that we really like to do initially is talk about what are the goals for this building? What are the goals for these spaces? Understanding the programming. What is the use going to be? Are these educational facilities? Is this going to be a public exhibit like a museum would have? Is this going to be smaller, intimate spaces that need other soundproofing?
Mm,
Understanding that programming up front and going through not just what needs to be in the building, but also the adjacencies
mm,
and where things will go really help us start to develop the foundation of how this project plan is going to work. Then we can, once we understand that, maybe in one space it's really important acoustics, and we can bring in a 3D scanner for that to understand the steel structure and what's there in the vibrations. Maybe in another space it's not as important to have that because it's a completely different use. And then maybe there we only need to do some level of probes. So it's me every dollar, as I said, every dollar is important on these
Yeah.
projects, and you need to make sure you get the most out of it instead of just spending money wherever seems the cool place to spend money at a time.
Right. So, still looking kind of long-term picture here, what crucial factors should someone consider when they're planning for the future? And when I mean future, I'm talking the ongoing maintenance of these restored historic properties.
Great question. So, as we said before, right, it's not just the construction, it's the turnover, it's the use of these
Right.
spaces. That's why money's being spent anyway. So, I think one of the really critical things, and one of the things we've actually brought in house as part of our overall strategic planning,
Mhm.
is understanding the operations. I'll
Mm.
tell you a quick story. The Clark Art Institute, beautiful museum in Williamstown, Massachusetts. We were fortunate enough to be involved with both the renovation and restoration of that project as well as the expansion. In the renovation and restoration of the project, there were mechanical systems that were designed
Mhm.
to be a part of this restoration that were incredibly advanced. Really cool things. Geothermal wells, there's plenty of research and papers on this. The Clark really did a great job of investing in their infrastructure. But we also had a staff who was very used to what they've used before, right? They had, I mean, frankly, there were some band-aids there and there was some tape and duct tape that was being used, but there were systems that were very familiar because they've been there
And
for
they had worked.
and they had
They were
worked.
making them work at least.
Part of the discussion with the Clark was, well, we're in a different system now as part of this design, as part of this construction. Let's plan with your facility staff to have them come in and partner and understand, well, here's where we need staff. Here's the training that we need. Here are the exercises that we need. We help them figure out the preventative maintenance side of things and how do we
Talk to them
best.
about challenges they're seeing, get their input, get them involved.
Exactly, because just like in a project, when you think about the maintenance and of facilities and these types of projects, that's a project itself, and it needs the right plan to be able to be integrated as part of the long-term success of the building.
Yeah. And so with kind of these challenges or the long-term thinking, which is a challenge because you don't know what the future holds, but
Mhm.
a lot of uniqueness has been discussed. What about is there a common thread? What are the similarities that you see in these types of projects?
So I think the biggest similarity is that this process, like the importance of a process in these type of
Mhm.
projects when you don't have all the facts, is just paramount.
Okay.
Having the veteran quarterback, making sure that we have people in the right place, making sure we have the right team built up. There are plenty of talented architects, engineers, construction managers, general contractors out there. But this is a specialty, and making sure it's not just the right firm, but the right people who are supporting these projects becomes critically important.
Mm.
And as you're developing that plan, having a true partner with that client, talking through some of these potentially hard decisions.
Right.
It's not easy to just say, hey, we need to replace the HVAC infrastructure and all of the ductwork in the building. That's a lot of dollars being invested. But understanding both the limitations as well as the opportunities of existing systems versus new systems, it's a real dialogue and there isn't always an obvious answer.
Right.
But what we look to work on with our clients is making sure all of the facts are on the table as best as we know them so that informed answers can be generated.
Yeah. It is fascinating, and I really thank you for sitting down with me today and talking about this very specific topic. I think you've really highlighted the balance between what these architectural buildings need to shine, but also that appropriate level of modification really to sustain them into the future. And I know we could go on and get more in the weeds. But I don't have time for that with you today. So, for those that want to dive a little bit deeper, have some lingering questions, what's the best way for them to reach you? LinkedIn? Is that easy?
LinkedIn is
Okay.
is very easy. Email,
Okay.
my contact information is out there. So always happy to have a conversation and talk through. how we go through these projects in the right way.
Awesome. And then for those of you that aren't maybe as familiar with Jason, his last name Zubatkin is Zubatkin. So thank you again, Jason. It was a pleasure, and I hope we get to talk soon.
I can't wait.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Construction Insiders podcast. You can continue the conversation by leaving a comment, asking a question, or participating in our poll. You can also visit us at cumming-group.com for more great resources from the most trusted team in the built environment. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes.